All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. If members will take their seats, we'll convene tonight's meeting of the District-Wide Boundary Review Advisory Committee. So good evening, members, to our audience members and those who will be watching on video and YouTube later in the week. So I just wanted to walk through tonight's agenda. We have a few items to cover this evening. After public comment, we're going to get an update and preliminary recommendation from the committees that were addressing the criteria for both K-8 schools and middle schools. And hopefully after that presentation and update, we're going to take an action and vote on whether to adopt those two rules packages. After that, as staff will be tallying those votes, we'll take a brief 5 minutes to look and adopt the past sets of meeting notes that we still have unresolved from our last 4 meetings. And then after that, we have one substantive item remaining, which is to get an update from the West Side Boundary Subcommittee that will give us their recommendations on the revised Scenario 2B in response to the variety of public comment that we've heard in the past few weeks. We'll get a presentation from them, have group discussion, and then hopefully take an action on whether or not to adopt the proposed recommendation. And after that, staff are going to give us an overview of what the next steps will be for D-BRAC going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitator, Jim Jacks, who will facilitate public comment.
Thank you, Chairman Trombley. My name is Jim Jacks. I work at Portland State University, and I've been the D-BRAC facilitator. We're going to shift into the public comment portion of the meeting, and we're going to have a short announcement in Spanish for Spanish speakers wishing translation services. I'm going to have Marco make an announcement.
Gracias. Mi nombre es Marco Estrada. Voy a ser el intérprete en español. Para cualquier necesidad de interpretación en español, por favor, estoy aquí. Gracias.
Thank you. So we've got a public comment period here. It's important for new people in the audience to realize D-BRAC's role is to give advice to the superintendent. D-BRAC doesn't have the authority or responsibility to make final decisions related to boundaries. That's the school board, and whatever the superintendent sends to the school board, there will be a normal public process as part of that. So that's a long way to say tonight is not your only chance to provide feedback to this process. It is a chance, but not the only one. We've got many more people filled out yellow cards than we have time for, and I apologize about that. If you have filled out a yellow card and you're not selected to speak, I encourage you to provide some written comments to D-BRAC, either with the green cards in the back or via email. And we've got about 8 or 9 cards here, and it's 2 minutes each, and the process is I'll call your name, you come up to this microphone, say your name and which school you're affiliated with, and you've got 2 minutes, and I have a timer here, and with about 30 seconds, I will wave this enormous yellow card to give you a clue, and I'll be on my knee here, and when I stand up, that is your cue to finish up. And if people can keep to their time, that allows more time for more people to speak. So at this point, and I'll call 2 names at once. The first name is for the person to come up, and then the second name is who's on deck. So if you're farther in the back, start to make your way forward. So Tina, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. Tina Oliver, followed by Lynn Brown. Tina Oliver. With Hayhurst. Oh, perfect.
Can I make it a little taller? Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Is that right? Okay. My name is Tina Oliver, and my daughter is a 3rd grader at Hayhurst Elementary School in the neighborhood program. Thank you all for this opportunity to speak and advocate for my school. We all appreciate how difficult this is for D-BRAC, PPS Board, and Superintendent Smith, as well as the families of the Southwest. Tonight I have 2 points. First, I'd like to give feedback on Scenario 2B. From the perspective of Hayhurst, it is incomplete. It does not address how to deal with under-enrollment at Hayhurst once Odyssey is relocated. This is of great concern to our community, as we have been told that we may potentially lose our technology teacher, counseling, and have less PE and library support if under-enrolled. As the second highest historically underserved school in Southwest Portland, it is unconscionable to burden our students with a loss of services and instruction, particularly while the programs of our wealthier neighboring schools remain intact and even entirely untouched. If this process is truly looking at options through the lens of equity, then please focus the view in on Hayhurst and let us know what will happen once Odyssey is relocated. We would like to know the plan. My second point is to reiterate that the best option for Hayhurst neighborhood program is for Odyssey to relocate for fall of 2016, and then for children from our neighboring schools to fill in the space so that we can continue to grow and thrive as a neighborhood school. We support Odyssey in finding a building that fits their program, and we will help in whatever way we can. But the impact of severe overcrowding on our unique population of kids cannot be overstated. We have expressed the sentiment in the past, and it gets repeated often, that our community will be flexible and we will work out whatever happens, even if we're all still here this fall. This is true, but please don't misinterpret our sentiment. Our willingness to be reasonable should not be interpreted as complacently accepting the short end of the stick for our kids. On a lighter note, I just want to say, as a community, we briefly considered an organized wardrobe approach in the hopes of having our voices heard and our concerns addressed. But in the end, we followed our Odyssey Friends lead, and instead we collected money that we would have used to purchase t-shirts, and we donated it to Hayhurst's Food Bags for Kids program, which provides weekly support to 48 food insecure families at Hayhurst every week. And this is who we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn Brown and then Jorge Padilla.
Thank you. Hi, we do have t-shirts, as I see some other schools here do too. So that's a tough act to follow. Thank you. Thank you for the time tonight. I echo Tina's sentiments in respecting and appreciating all the time that you, as a committee, and that PPS is putting into this very difficult process. My name is Lynn Brown. I am a Spanish immersion parent at Ainsworth with 3 kids currently in the program and a 4th that would hopefully be entering in September in the kindergarten class. We live 1 block from Ainsworth. One of my children is on a 504 plan, deeply rooted in his program. And so for the thoughts and ideas that have been explained of this being an easy switch for the Spanish immersion program to move to East Sylvan, I can personally attest that it is not an easy decision, and one that many of us are considering very thoughtfully. As D-BRAC has looked at all of these potential solutions, all of which are short-term options based on the projected growth of our city, one thing that I think that all of us in this room can agree on is that we want to create the most effective solution while impacting and disrupting the fewest families possible. And this proposal is not that. The current D-BRAC proposal has over 1,000 students moving, just like the last proposal, most of whom are being moved saying that they do not want to make the move prescribed for them. We believe that there is a better way, and we have had many constructive conversations with our neighbors from other schools, and we all agree that many of us agree that there is a better way. Instead of the current plan, why not follow the theory of build it and they will come? Let's create more immersion programs citywide, a mission of PPS, on East and West, attracting families to under-enrolled and underserved schools so people are opting in to join communities rather than being torn away. We've modeled successful proposals and shared them with D-BRAC, PPS, and school board members, which follow this principle, building new and enhancing the 14 existing programs in the East, while also answering the demand in the West, where there is currently only 1 immersion program with over 120 children turned away this year. We've considered that Odyssey wants their own building and would like to be placed at East Sylvan. We've also considered that a number of neighboring schools like Ainsworth, MLC, Forest Park, and Bridal Mile all have available capacity to support Chapman and believe that families should be able to opt into nearby schools where space exists. Those are solutions that can work. By following our proposals, fewer children will move, and the vast majority of those moving will be going to a location where they would like to go. That is what makes sense. We ask that for any program going into a currently closed school to please put the children's needs and interests first. PPS, please promise us that any building being reopened needs to come, I'm almost done, needs to come with the proper safety and support for the program entering that building. If Odyssey does get their wish to be placed in East Sylvan, we stand by their need to have appropriately upgraded facilities. We are an ever-growing, progressive city. Let's increase equity by building up rather than tearing down, because that is what works. Thank you.
Thank you. Jorge Podilla, followed by Janine Partovi. Jorge Podilla.
Sí, gracias. Sí. Buenas tardes.
Good evening.
Yo soy el padre al que PPS menciona como historically underserved. Esa población por la que el PPS trabaja para cerrar la brecha. Yo soy ese padre cuyos hijos están en el programa de inmersión en español en Ainsworth. Y esa propuesta deja de un lado. Yo soy ese padre que no puede venir a las reuniones de D-BRAC, porque ni siquiera sabe qué significa D-BRAC, porque la comunicación que recibe viene en inglés. Yo soy ese padre que vive lejos de Ainsworth, el que maneja 1 hora para llegar al único programa de inmersión en español en el oeste de Portland. Yo soy ese padre que no tiene licencia de manejar, el que no tiene papeles y tiene miedo de hablar. Yo soy ese padre que hizo la promesa a sus hijos de engullecerse de su cultura y compartirla con su comunidad, y esa comunidad es Ainsworth. Yo soy ese padre orgulloso de ver a sus hijos integrados en una comunidad de que otra manera no tendría acceso a ella. Yo soy ese padre al que PPS llamó el año pasado para que sus hijos entraran en el programa de español y mejorar la estadística historically underserved at Ainsworth. Al que PPS dijo que el programa de inmersión era un exitoso programa y que sería muy bueno para sus hijos. Yo soy ese padre que ahora, perdido entre las instrucciones, no entiende por qué se le margina y se le espera de una comunidad escolar floreciente y exitosa. Yo soy ese padre a esos niños que dejan atrás, después de todos los esfuerzos de PPS por integrarnos, el que queda enterrado entre los números y las estadísticas de D-BRAC y PPS. Yo respeto estos padres. Yo represento a estos padres que están ahí en Ainsworth, los que no tenemos voz y los que venimos a su reunión, los que no venimos a sus reuniones, los que no les escribimos cartas o correos. Eso es PPS. Intentará una vez más close the achievement gap cuando ya lo estaba consiguiendo en Ainsworth. Cuando tenga que tomar una decisión, por favor, piense en este padre que no está aquí, ese padre al que no escucharon, está ahí, son Ainsworth.
I just want to translate right now. I'm that parent that PPS refers to the historically underserved, that population that PPS is working hard in. I'm that parent whose kids are at the Spanish immersion at Ainsworth, and that this proposal leaves behind. I am that parent that can't come to the D-BRAC meetings because they don't even know what that means, because the communication that we received comes in English. I am that parent that who lives far away from Ainsworth, the one that who drives an hour to get to the only Spanish immersion program at the West. I am that father who doesn't have a driver license, who doesn't have papers, and is afraid to speak. That parent who made that promise to his kids to embrace their heritage and share it with the community. And that community is Ainsworth. I am that hopeful parent that sees their children belong to a community that otherwise they won't have access to. I am that parent that PPS called last year to enroll their kids at Spanish immersion at Ainsworth because PPS told me that it was a successful program and that will be the best for my kids. I am that parent who now is lost in translation, who doesn't understand why we are being marginalized, separated from our community and from a flourishing school. The one who is left behind after all PPS efforts to reach out to us. The one who is lost in the D-BRAC numbers and stats. We are there at Spanish Immersion Ainsworth. We just don't have a voice. You won't see us at your meetings. We won't write your letters. We won't write you letters. And you will try once again to close the achievement gap that you were close to achieve at Ainsworth Spanish Immersion. When you make your decision, think about that parent that is not here, that you didn't hear from. We are there. We are Ainsworth.
Thank you. So I'm told the next two people want to share their time, Janine Partovi and Alan Beebe. Go ahead.
My name is Janine Partovi. I'm the PTA president at Bridal Mile, and I stand before you again tonight concerned regarding a number of aspects of the most recent scenario introduced Tuesday. The new map is actually more disruptive than any previous scenario. It impacts 40% more students on the West Side. West Side parents were irate that the last scenario disrupted 936 children, but this new map impacts 1,300 children. How can this possibly be perceived as a better solution? Bridal Mile's population is reduced by nearly a third and becomes under-enrolled at 340 students based on the PPS target of a minimum of 375. Our school will lose incredible teachers and many specials if this scenario was put in place. This is unacceptable. Bridal Mile parents and students at West Sylvan and Lincoln are distressed regarding recent D-BRAC grandfathering discussions. We ask that grandfathering remain as is, especially for our older students who are on a curriculum path that is not supported in the Wilson cluster. PPS has acknowledged in historic documents dating back to 2006 that a large part of the balancing challenges on the West Side is due to the perceived disparity between Lincoln and Wilson high schools. PPS has continued to reinforce this disparity through this process. In Tuesday's meeting, a language immersion program within the Wilson cluster was discussed, which was then quickly dismissed. Wilson is the only cluster in all of Portland that does not have a language immersion. PPS, please commit to shifting the perception disparity between Lincoln and Wilson by investing time, resources, and programs in the Wilson cluster. Lastly and importantly, there is an alternative way PPS can fairly and equitably redraw boundary lines across all of the West with less total impact and without targeting a single neighborhood community. Again, we believe a more efficient model is available, and we ask that PPS and D-BRAC persevere until the right model is found. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alan Beebe, and I represent the Bridal Mile staff. Dear fellow educators and community members, We, the staff of Bridal Mile Elementary, would like it to be known that we collectively wish to affirm our commitment to maintaining Bridal Mile Elementary as the exemplary school and cohesive community that it has historically been. While we are obviously concerned with any change in our community that may adversely affect our school, we wish to strongly state our considerable concern with the latest proposal 2B, which would remove 150 students from our school. This would immediately have the impact of no longer making us a right-sized school. The loss of programs, staff, and community support due to the significant decrease in enrollment for Bridal Mile would be devastating to our students. The decrease would potentially reduce or eliminate programs such as PE, technology, while increasing class sizes well past district-recommended numbers. In addition, the reduction would leave up to 6 classrooms empty rather than maintaining a right-sized school that currently fits perfectly into its building. If Proposal 2B is selected, the Bridal Mile school community as we know it would no longer exist. As a solution, we would propose that voluntary dual assignment, as presented previously by our community, receive serious consideration. With complete support of a dual assignment choice between West Sylvan and Robert Gray, including transportation, the district could achieve the numbers needed to alleviate crowding at West Sylvan and Lincoln. We believe, based on what we observe here at Bridal Mile, and with appropriate communications of the option to attend either school, that this option could be a viable solution and is less damaging than the current proposal. Please, give this option equitable time for consideration. Bridal Mile Elementary staff.
Thank you. Thank you. Rosie Platt, and then Joaquia Fitzgerald from Chavez.
Hello, my name is Rosie Platt. I'm the PTA president at Chapman, speaking on behalf of our community and families. Thank you again for all the time and hard work you have put into this process and for coming up with a plan to relieve Chapman of its overcrowding. I'll be brief tonight, as I know other schools have more pressing issues and concerns with the recent proposal. Our biggest concern with scenario 2B for our community revolves around the Willamette Heights neighborhood, which is several blocks away from Chapman and is presently slated to move to Ainsworth. It appears to be a mapping error of some sort, as these roads are dead ends and do not connect to Ainsworth over the hills. Families would literally drive past Chapman, a walking distance away, only to commute across the entire Chapman catchment on small, congested inner-city roads to Ainsworth. If this is a mapping error, hopefully it'll be quickly fixed, and if not, please look into this further. Secondly, if moving part of Chapman to the east side does come up again, I want to relay the issues that Chapman parents have brought up. These include concerns about bridge traffic, transportation issues, loss of walkability, distances to middle schools and high schools if they would remain part of an east side catchment, relocation of lower SES communities, and diversity issues. Lastly, we are in support of the way you have addressed the potential future development of the post office and ESCO industrial areas. Thank you again for all of your hard work. Thank you.
Jamaica Fitzgerald, I apologize.
I'm from Cesar Chavez School, and I am here to advocate for a simple solution to the proposed overcrowding at the Chavez School. According to our principal, all we need to make our school viable for the next 10 years is 2 portables. 2 portables, and it solves all of our problems. The 2 portables cost $10,000 to $50,000 each. We already have money saved up for a fence that was going to cost $50,000. We can help to pay for our own portables. We're willing to do this, and I would also like to show as example that we have a Title I district here. There's one school in our Title I district that is not Title I, and that's Astor. And Astor has been given all these special privileges. They've been given portables. They were excused from the whole boundary redrawing. Their school, got a pass to be totally unaffected, while all the Title I schools with all the minority kids are affected. We don't think that that's right. We don't think that that's equitable. If they get to have portables, we feel that we should get to have portables. And I know that you have, and also Astor is more overcrowded than our school. So that just doesn't make sense, and it's not fair. And also, we would like to say that each school needs to be dealt with on an individual basis. There's no one panacea for everybody. And here at Chavez, we have a really beautiful thing. We have a community school clinic. We have a immersion program. Over half of our kids are Latino, and we have the immersion program for them. I know that they're talking about maybe closing some immersions or something like that, which is horrible. Don't want to see that happen. But if you're going to keep one, ours has the most kids, and it has the biggest community that it's serving of Latino families. And also, we have the SUN program for our kids. My daughter spends 10 hours a day at school. If this program gets disrupted, I don't know what I could do for her. And Chavez is her cocoon. She feels safe there. Her and the other kids have a pit in their stomachs, knowing that their oasis at Chavez might be going away. And it's really sad. They're coming to school stressed out, and it's not okay. So we think that the K-8 model we like the K-8 model because we feel that it keeps our kids safe with their brothers and sisters. It keeps the kids more young. When they go to the middle schools, it seems like they grow up a little too fast. They're all kind of strangers to each other. There's a lot of bullying that goes on. And also, we feel really insecure about the middle school that you're proposing that we take half our kids and send them off to. That program is underfunded. It's not it needs help, So that needs to be straightened out first. And so we would just like to ask for the 2 portables. We would really appreciate keeping our program going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Jim Shakari, and then David Augustine. Jim, Odyssey program?
Coming.
Okay, terrific.
I guess I took the long way around. Good evening. My name is Jim Shikani. I'm the parent of twin 3rd graders at the Odyssey program at Hayhurst Elementary and a board member of the Odyssey Strategic Planning Committee. Over the last several months, our community has been generally supportive of the proposed move out of Hayhurst Elementary. We've studied the proposed locations and determined that East Sylvan's and Smith's size and layout fit our program well, and each offers or could offer amenities that our program regularly uses. More recently, Jackson Middle School has gained momentum as a possible site within the D-BRAC's West Side Subcommittee. As an organization and parent community, we would like you to reconsider that option. Last weekend, OSPC conducted a parent survey of proposed sites, which included Jackson Middle School. Our concerns about Jackson Middle School include 72% of Odyssey families oppose this site despite its southwest location. Housing our K-5 students at a facility built as a high school, which houses over 4 times as many middle schoolers as our K-5 program, is unprecedented and presents physical challenges as well as safety concerns. Jackson will add stress to our 6, 7, 8 students who may find it challenging to navigate a situation of being tied to the Odyssey K-8 program, yet sectioned off from a large group of their peers. Our teachers do not feel that Jackson Middle School is the right fit, and therefore 40% of Odyssey families anticipate leaving the program if it's sited there. We're ready to help in whatever capacity and timeframe necessary to move into a location that would fit our program and PPS. We understand the sensitivities at issue and what has sadly turned our schools, communities, and parents into vying for their particular interest instead of the greater good. We remain open to partnering with another PPS program or a location that works for PPS, our kids, our teachers, and our parents. If Odyssey needs to be squishy at Hayhurst for another year to allow the dust to settle with boundary changes throughout Portland, then Odyssey is open to that idea. Hayhurst and Odyssey work well together, and I want to give you two recent examples. First, tonight is our school's 21st Multicultural Fair, which is an all-school event where kids, parents experience entertainment, arts and crafts, and food from all over the world. In order to put this event together, it requires lots of volunteers from the neighborhood and Odyssey. Second, instead of getting t-shirts, crafty slogans, or both, we opted to donate the t-shirt money raised, which was $400, to the Food Bags for Kids program. Food Bags for Kids is a school-wide program which helps feed our most vulnerable kids every week. In the end, the decision should be what is best workable solution for everyone, and perhaps that solution has not shown itself yet for the Odyssey program, but will be in the near future. If you like or need more information about our program to help you in your decision-making, please contact us or the school. We'd be happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you. So subbing for David is?
Hi, my name is Muna Kabaz, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the West Sylvan former Bridal Mile students living south of Patton. I've also brought along a letter written by my 8th grade daughter who could not be here herself since she is at a joint band performance at Lincoln, ironically named Welcome Future Cards. In this discussion, in it, she discusses her fears such as academic changes, loss of friends, and fear of social isolation. I will hand it out later. Aside of addressing all the well-documented studies showing how damaging it is to move kids at this age from their social support group and the curriculum mismatches so that students who have been studying Mandarin and Arabic would not be able to continue at Wilson, I would like to address the numbers being discussed for the South Patton former Bridal Mile students. D-BRAC, on its meeting on Tuesday, stated that they believed overcrowding at Lincoln could be alleviated by moving 60 to 65 kids per year if this former Bridal Mile group does not follow their cohort from West Sylvan to Lincoln. This is grossly overstated. I went through the entire West Sylvan directory, tallied up the number of students, and cross-referenced them with an old Bridal Mile class list, accounting for each and every family. The number from the south of Patton is only 40. Then I added 2 families who I know have since moved into the neighborhood, so the total is a total of 42. I was at West Sylvan today helping an 8th grade block and looked to see how many of the 30 kids in the class would be affected. 2 kids. 2 of 30 in the class. The number of kids who call in sick on any given day at Lincoln would have far more effect on overcrowding than this group from Bridal Mile. Also, if you take out the number of families who have said they are planning on other high schools, regardless of boundary changes, the number drops from 42 to 37. Of them, 2 Spanish-speaking kids from our underserved population have joined Spanish immersion, so the number drops to 35. At least half have siblings at Lincoln. If you allow grandfathering for siblings, which we strongly believe is necessary, the number of students asked to move to Wilson is 15 to 20. That would be negligible impact and punitive to ask the small subset to support their networks and really not benefit Lincoln. If you look at the numbers of 6th and 7th graders in the same area, in the same group, 6th graders south of Patton, 33 kids. 7th graders, 28 kids. And that doesn't even include the numbers that would possibly move or go to other high schools. Clearly, West Sylvan and Lincoln really need to be considered as one school. The numbers do not alleviate Lincoln overcrowding. Thank you.
So that concludes the public comment portion of our meeting. And we're going to shift gears to the next agenda item. And I want to set that up briefly for D-BRAC members. John.
I just wanted to do 2 quick announcements to you. So first, I wanted to just let you know that Superintendent Smith apologizes that she is not here tonight. As you know, she's been at every meeting for the last 3 months. But she is attending a statewide meeting of all superintendents pre-legislative session with the state superintendent of education. So that's why she's not here tonight. She wanted me to tell you that. And then I also just wanted to take a moment, because today was a big day for all school districts. Today was the day that graduation rates were released to the public. our 14-15 graduation rates, and if you didn't see them, it was announced that PPS graduation rate increased for the 7th straight year to 74%, which is great news by itself. In there was great news for most of our high schools, and we saw gains across the board, but because I don't want to take too much time, I want to point out two things. One was that Franklin High School had the 2nd highest rate in the state of graduation for economically disadvantaged students at 86%, which was phenomenal. And then lastly, if you didn't see, Jefferson Middle College for Advanced Studies, of which our D-BRAC member, Margaret Calvert, principal of Jefferson, is on your committee, posted an 80% graduation rate, which is up 25% in 4 years. And I just wanted to say congratulations to Margaret and her staff. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the good news. So what we want to do with this agenda item, broadly speaking, is do some quick updates and then get a sense of where the committee is on some of these recommendations. So to use a dinner analogy, when you go out to dinner with 19 or 20 of your friends, does the restaurant deliver the appetizer, the salad, the dinner, and the dessert at the same time? No. Not enough room on the table for all those plates, and you can't eat it all at once. And that's kind of what happened last week. From a process point of view, we put too much in front of you at once. And what we're doing this week is breaking things into more digestible pieces. So hopefully that should help the group move forward. So a couple of process reminders. Last February 19th, this group unanimously adopted your operating protocols. And that says for substantive issues to pass D-BRAC, you need 60% of the committee, in this case 15 votes, to move something forward. In addition, for people who aren't voting in the majority, you have the option to submit a minority statement explaining your position and why you're voting differently than the majority. So for those of you tonight that may want to do some minority statements, submit those to PPS staff. They become part of the D-BRAC record. And the idea here is that the superintendent get the wisdom that you've accumulated over the last 35 meetings. This is your 35th meeting. You've listened a lot, you've learned a lot, you've talked a lot, you've explored a lot of issues, and it's entirely reasonable for you to have the same information and come to different conclusions on some parts of this. So disagreement is okay. I know along the way we've done a lot of work that's almost aimed toward consensus. We spend a lot of time listening to each other, but at this stage of the process, we're really needing to land on things, and it is okay for disagreements to occur. So not everyone is here tonight and Chairman Trombley will be connecting with them over the next few days to make sure they get a chance to weigh in on all the information that you'll weigh in on in the next hour or so. So the next step here is we're going to get some report outs from the subcommittees of the work they did this week. And while they're doing that, I'm going to be handing out the subcommittee reports, if that's the right word to use them. But those subcommittee reports will be broken into kind of 3 digestible pieces so that you'll have the exact language in front of you. It'll just be on 3 pages instead of 1. So my understanding is Pamela is ready to talk about K-8. And so we'll turn it over to Pamela. And she's looking to briefly walk you through it. A lot of this stuff should be very familiar, but there'll be some that's a little new. And we're not looking for a debate. We're looking for clarifying questions, okay? And I'll be pretty strict about that. In the past, we've been very conversational as a committee culture. Tonight, we really need to zero in on seeing where the committee lands on some of these different issues. So, Pamela.
Thank you. First, I want to just recognize the members of the committee. And if I leave anyone out, please just raise your hand. But it's Maxine, Hector, Nisha, Alice, Sheila, and Scott. Is that correct? Oh, and Pam Knowles. Sorry, you weren't sitting in the line. Okay, So these have been broken out into 3 sections, and I'm going to highlight the first section first, and then Jim's going to tell me what to do. The first is a recommendation that Portland Public Schools return to a predominantly K-5 middle school model, and that any school that remains a K-8 must have sufficient enrollment and space in one building to support 3 sections per grade at all levels and not impede the ability of other schools to maintain sufficient enrollment to support a full K-5 middle school program. So there are 4 exceptions to this rule. And the first is an instance in which the reconfiguration school's geographic location would result in commute times consistently greater than 1 hour and potentially unsafe commutes for students to middle school. And the school, we've identified 1 school, Skyline, that meets this exception. The second is instances in which a school building is under construction as a K-8 model, including contracts with and commitments to outside partners, integral and unique to the program, and Fabian K-8 school under construction with Concordia Universities meets this exception and should remain a K-8. Is this, no, this one's, okay.
It's this thing over here.
Is it on? No. You're good? Okay, super. Non-neighborhood and focus option and alternative schools. These programs are under an ongoing review in a separate process and were not significantly addressed by this committee. And in addition, we want to recognize that PPS is constrained by size and location of its current portfolio of buildings. And while the final reconfiguration plan is developed, there may be K-8s that continue to exist because there's no good options for conversion due to the size of the building and the availability of middle school spaces. So I guess I wanted to ask if there are questions of clarification.
Give an example of that last category. So D-BRAC members, clarifying questions. What were Thank you. So we have on this 2 things for people in the back who can't see very well. There's plenty of seats down here where you're closer to the screen and you have a better sense to track what the committee is looking at. For committee members, you'll notice the sheet of paper. There's 3 sheets, kind of 3 chunks of it, and at the bottom is a blank. There's kind of 2 blanks. One that says I can live with this, and one that says I'm opposed to this. And so what we're going to do in a couple of minutes is have you write your name, print your name on one of those blanks, and then we'll collect those and we'll go to the next sheet. And again, you'll write your name on one of the blanks and we'll collect them, and we'll do that for all 3 of these. And then we'll do something similar with the middle school, and then later this evening something similar with the West Side Boundary piece. So what we're looking for here is, based on everything you've learned thus far throughout this process, where are you? Okay? So for some of you, well, for a lot of groups that have used this decision-making tool, a lot of the decisions are actually really easy. And there'll be some of them that will probably be very hard, just because there's a variety of opinions around the table, and that was by design, to have a large variety of people to provide input and potential advice to the superintendent. So again, the blanks are, I can live with this. It doesn't have to be perfect. And the other blank is, I'm opposed to this. And if you're opposed, you can do a minority statement or not. You're not required to. It's an option for you. So let's do K-8 criteria number 1. That's the top left, K-8 criteria and recommendation exceptions. And you're looking at the language between the 2 solid lines, which is exactly cut and pasted from the committee report. And if you have, and let's take about 2 minutes to sign your name to one of those, 2 blanks, and then we'll shift to the next page, which is the criteria number 2. And that one's labeled urgency and interim, and those words just come out of some of the subheadings. So if you are done with the first page, recommendation and exceptions, why don't you hand it to me, or maybe pass them down to the end. So once we get these collected, we will tally them up and we will announce the results this evening, shortly after we get them added up. So any others on sheet number 1? Print your name. I mean, signing it, I may not be able to read it. Printing is better in this case than signing. So are we ready to shift to sheet number 2? Sheet number 2 is K-8 criteria second, urgency and interim. If you're done with that one, shift to sheet 3. So Pamela just said she wanted to explain sheet number 2 in more detail. I thought she had done that already, and I was skipping ahead too quickly. I apologize.
Okay, sorry. So I think that the committee's talked a lot about the tension between urgency and successful implementation. And so I wanted to summarize some of the discussions that our committee had. We wanted to propose that we heed the guidance of the Superintendent Smith and offer to D-BRAC in December the grade configuration not be implemented until fall 2017, again with a few exceptions and stipulations for the interim. Ockley Green and the Jefferson Cluster is presented, if it's possible for PPS to deliver a robust middle school program at Ockley Green this fall, that D-BRAC believes that it should do so. We want to emphasize that family certainty is important, and so as much as possible determine which schools would become K-5 and which would be middle schools in March, and decide boundary decisions and high school feeder patterns by late May. D-BRAC accepts the district's invitation to continue an advisory role in these final steps, and we urge the district to stick to the timeline that was outlined. We also wanted to offer some interim steps that we support about supporting the K-8 programs that continue to exist in the next year. We want to ensure equal instructional time at the middle school level regardless of grade configuration, and that, encourage the district to collaborate with both PAT and principals this spring to find a solution to make that happen. And we would like to also advocate to invest in additional course options for under-enrolled K-8 schools, recognizing that this impacts the number of course offerings at the schools.
Clarifying question, Scott.
So I just want to clarify that this means that the committee does not consider Beverly Cleary to be an urgent situation.
What's the last part, Scott?
Okay, again, does this work? Just want to clarify that this means that the committee and or D-BRAC does not consider Beverly Cleary's situation to be urgent.
Other questions of clarification? Okay, so let's take 2 minutes. Either you can live with it or you are opposed. And print your name, please, and turn them in. Another 30 seconds or so, and we'll shift to the third sheet. Pamela, go ahead.
We just had one recommendation regarding implementation of the district-wide K-8 reconfiguration, that the district ensure adequate funding for facilities upgrades and program deliveries, and to ensure equitable access to program offerings. Recommending that the budget be allocated to ensure that all schools are funded to support a minimum of foreign language electives, one science technology elective, arts electives, and PE electives per grade, depending on the needs and the interests of the students at that school.
Questions of clarification? Scott?
Is this for K-5s and middle schools? Or is this for K-8s that for next year that are in transition? Is this for K-8s that we're talking about, these minimum offerings?
Yes, for K-8s. Michael?
Just following up on that, the clarifying question, in particular, foreign language, are we saying foreign language at what grade level?
It's not a recommendation just, doesn't feel like, is this on? It's that at each grade level that you have the appropriate elective offering. So it's not, in my opinion, and committee members, correct me if you disagree, that it's not advocating that all elementary school students receive foreign language, but that all students, if there's a grade where students receive foreign language instruction, that all schools offer that at the appropriate grade.
Any other questions of clarification? Okay, let's take 2 minutes and sign your name to this one. Print it, please. A couple of you have wonderful signatures, but I can't make out the letters. And my wife's a pharmacist. I don't know how to read handwriting very well. So let's do a quick 2 minutes, and then we'll shift gears to middle schools. Any others? Oh, excuse me, Julie, sorry. So let's change gears to middle school. A similar process. We'll have Joe Zender, who's on the subcommittee, talk about the different chunks of it. Again, you're going to have 3 pieces of paper, which is the information exactly cut and pasted from the subcommittee recommendation. And Joe, why don't you start, and I'll hand these out.
Well, and before we go into that, there's one clarification that I think that we need to talk about with the last set of recommendations. So Margaret, you want to do that? And here I'll pass the mic over.
So I wanted to go back to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch up here. So go back to the piece about the Ockley Green Jefferson cluster proposal, which is slightly different on this paper than it was in the report that was sent to us. And the language, yeah, that you had such a good one here. The language that was on page 11 and said that Ockley Green currently houses grades 4 through 8 in a split campus configuration with Chief Joseph, which serves grades K-3. Recognizing that students currently on the Ockley Green campus will enter grades 5-8 this fall, the school could open as a middle school at that time, and adding in students in grades 6-8 from nearby K-8s that would convert to K-5s. And that would, and then I just want to make sure I'm understanding that that would mean that 5th grade would then move the year after. Is that correct?
So the recommendation that we had was for the superintendent to seriously look at the feasibility of implementing the plan presented by the Jefferson Cluster Committee, for lack of, I can't remember exactly what they called it. So it didn't outline exactly how that would work, but should be referenced back to that document and ask the superintendent and the board to look at whether that is the best way or what is the best way to implement those recommendations specifically.
So just for my clarity, again, thank you for entertaining my slow processing tonight. That would mean that really this recommendation is asking for it to be reviewed and a decision to be made in March to look at the numbers and the impacts. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So changing gears to middle school criteria.
Okay, and I just want to acknowledge the subcommittee members that worked on the middle school committee. It was Shannon Foxley, Margaret, who just spoke, Kim Wilson, who's not here tonight, Sarah Lewins, and Sasha Behrens, who's next to me. We have 3 recommendations, and I'm going to go through them one at a time, and I'm going to read them so that the folks in the audience can also hear what it is that we're voting on. So bear with me, and everybody can read along. So recommendation number 1. The selection of middle school locations and feeders should be based on having middle schools with a minimum enrollment that provides approximately 6 25 student sections per grade level, and that's 6th, 7th, and 8th. And this is to afford a range of course offerings, including electives and advanced and support level classes in such subjects as math, for example. If a new middle school will take up to 3 years to meet the target enrollment, the district shall provide supplemental resources so the school can offer programs and services expected of a middle school.
Questions of clarification on piece of advice 1 for middle school? Okay, let's take 2 minutes and please print your name on I can live with this or I am opposed to this. Joe, let's shift to the second one.
Okay, everyone ready? We're looking at middle school criteria, recommendation number 2. The selection of middle school locations should be based on Model B, Scenario B that we looked at. However, there should be only 2 middle schools in the part of North Portland in which Scenario B proposes 3. This change is in response to the low forecast enrollment and community feedback.
D-BRAC, questions of clarification?
The question was, what are the two? And the subcommittee recommendation is that we couldn't figure out how to have three, and we're leaving that decision about the two up to PPS.
Other questions or clarification? Okay, Margaret.
So there will be some impact between what was just voted on in the previous K-8 set of scenarios and this one. I just want to make that clear, that part of, that they impact each other.
Thank you. Any other questions of clarification? So let's take 2 minutes and sign your name on one of the blanks. I can live with this, or I am opposed to this. Clarifying question from Sheila.
By Model B, we're talking about the modeling exercise that was introduced on December 10th. It doesn't say Model B on the map.
I know it's supposed to be scenario B, and
Okay, I just wanna-
in the text, we actually had the date on it too, so whatever
Okay.
the date is, that we were trying to make sure that we referred to that shared document. And the three in that document, and Sheila, you've got a map of it, I don't, with me. There's 3 middle schools in sort of the North Portland Peninsula identified. I believe that one is, what are the 3?
It's from January 9th. The date is January 9th.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's why we wanted the date in the recommendation, because there's several versions of this. And Nate, could somebody shout out the 3 middle schools that we were asked to consider in the scenario B?
George, Cesar Chavez, and Ockley Green.
George, Cesar Chavez, and Ockley Green. And when we looked at the numbers and looked at sort of the arrangement of between K-8s and those middle schools, we came to the conclusion that a sustainable sort of level of enrollment could be attained, but it was only going to be for 2. And we thought that there were other considerations, and actually, in part, the kind of criteria that were going to come out of the K-5, K-8 groups work that needed to be considered to reshape that and to pick 2 middle schools out of those 3 and to make a district that, make a sort of a feeder pattern that succeeded under the terms of what we just approved through those other recommendations.
Scott.
So just clarifying in addition, we're not talking feeder patterns, we're just talking middle school sites, correct?
Right, that whole sort of how the feeder patterns work, Scott, is not what we're deciding, but we saw just the total population we can support 2.
I think that's important for everybody to be clear on.
Yes.
And that the other sites on the east side that are not currently middle schools that would be added would be Roseway Heights, Kellogg, Harrison Park, and Tubman. I think that's just to get it in the record and be clear.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Other clarifying questions on recommendation 2 for middle school criteria? So if you've got your name on a sheet, if I can collect it.
It's not making me comfortable.
Joe, let's shift to sheet 3.
Okay, so this is middle school criteria again, recommendation 3, and this is a long one, so please bear with me. Recommendation 3, to be able to successfully reconfigure the majority of K-8 schools beginning in fall of 2017, D-BRAC recommends the following 4 things. First, the district should prepare and implement transition plans for each new middle school. These plans should provide for the resources, planning, time, and community input needed to implement this effort successfully. The district should work with the principals and teachers to identify and incorporate elements required for successful transitions. Second, certainty as to student assignment should be established for families no later than May 2016. The move to K-5s in middle schools must be planned. Actually, this is a separate point. The move to K-5s in middle schools, so this is number 3, must be planned, designed, and resourced to preserve the benefits of K-8 schools where possible. This includes preserving the sense of children being known in their schools, including that each child will have more than one strong relationship with staff members. Approaches to consider include 6th grade academies to help students root in the middle school, and partnerships with feeder elementary schools such as reading buddies and joint field trips or arts productions so that students and families feel connected to both their K-5 and their middle schools. Number 4, both the board and the district must work with schools and family to ease transportation between K-5s and middle schools. The change from K-8 schools to K-5, 6-8 schools can make transportation to and from a school a significant challenge for some families. The distance and time to travel from home to school impacts whether a student can walk, bike, or help a sibling get to school, as well as whether parents can be actively engaged in the school. These issues are of particular concern to our undocumented immigrant families who may lack access to a driver's license. And number 5, the middle school committee concurs with the K-8 committee's recommendation to change Ockley Green back into a middle school for fall 2016 due to its unique readiness detailed in the K-8 recommendations.
D-BRAC, questions of clarification? Yeah, Sarah.
I know I was on the committee, but I didn't have, I wasn't there for this discussion. Tell me, how did you come up with the May 2016 date? That has me wondering if that's a realistic timeline. Yeah, Pam's shaking her head, and I'm thinking, if I'm going to help with this process, there's no way I can't meet enough between what's going on between now and May to give. I don't know. Where did you get that from?
You know, the date, as I recall, came from our notes, so I think we should talk about that now and correct this date, because clearly if it's not realistic, it's not something that we deliberated.
So was there somebody else on that subcommittee that remembers the piece of that conversation?
My understanding is that that decision has been encouraged by people connected to that school, and that the primary piece around this was living in the K-8 documentation. I think that the implementation realities will have to take place, you know, at the next phases of this, once the superintendent and the school board, you know, do what they do, whatever decisions they make. And so I think that if it were me, I would soften that language, not to lock in anything, but it is a recommendation to others who are going to be deciding how to then go forward.
So it strikes me as that we should come up with a more reasonable sort of expression of this desire for a deadline that's early enough so that families in schools can adjust. That was the point, I believe, right, Sarah? So I don't know what that timeline is, but that was the intent of this.
Because the May 2016 doesn't help with the transfer process. The transfer process is already closed at that point. So I'm not sure that it gets, maybe it just needs to be before the next transfer, maybe by December, so that it's very clear, so that when the transfer process does open up, I guess that's what I would say. I don't know that knowing in May gets them anything, because the board may have just made their vote.
So there's, going back to the K-8 criteria, the second sheet that you looked at, under the Ockley Green Jefferson cluster piece, it said, if it is possible for PPS to deliver a robust middle school program at Ockley Green this fall, D-BRAC believes it should do so. So this is where
So I assumed this was for all families in K-8s that they need to know by May of 2016. If it's for Ockley and Chief Joe, that totally makes sense if it's happening in the fall.
You know, the sense I made of this was it was the committee trying to put a marker down that as we go through this process, a date certain by which the families knew what's going on was important. And we've picked the wrong date, so we're looking for what that right date is.
So Sheila and Scott.
I believe that we got that timeline. John Isaacs may be able to answer this question. I thought that what I heard was that the board would act in March on the configuration questions, and that we would want by May or June to have feeder patterns and boundaries established for those new middle schools. That was my understanding of the timeline that we were presented with.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was.
That's what I was going to say too.
Yeah, John's nodding his head to that.
I think it makes sense to shoot for a May deadline for the committee to do its work. I think after that, there's going to have to be public input and a board decision, and that's out of our control. But I think we could come up with an east side plan, hopefully to move forward in that amount of time.
So if we could just get somebody to phrase that as a replacement for this, we could mark it and vote on it, or whatever the proper version is.
Right. Just really quickly, and I don't have phrasing, but I think that's right, because I think what we wanted to do was, given that the earliest any conversion would go into effect is fall 2017, and knowing that decisions were done, you wanted to at least give families almost the equivalent of at least 6 to 8 months to at least find a way to have those communities build new relationships, figure out how, the logistics of moving to that new school, how do they build a new school community, giving them enough time to make that transition and not rush that. So at least knowing what schools are going to be, changed and when, and then giving enough time, especially in the fall, for families to adjust. And if some families who may not like that decision, they still have enough time when the next year's transfer process kicks in to apply to a different school if they wanted to. So it's giving enough families enough time in that following school year before the changes go into effect for families to make a different decision, whatever.
So let me try something here. Based on the...
So staff has a suggestion, just hearing you, and that would be that something like, notwithstanding any changes that could happen at Ockley Green for the 2016 school year, all student assignment decisions related to reconfiguration should be made and families notified by the end of the 2015-16 school year. Does that get you? So by the end of this school year, all of the assignment decisions related to the reconfiguration are made and families are made aware.
So that's June.
That's June 30th, right?
So my thought is, with the question around 2016, given the conversation the group just had, it felt to me like you had a shared understanding of what that meant, and it got clarified. So I'm wondering if the group could say yes or no to this, recognizing your discussion that you just had. And Tony.
So I'm
thinking through my mind about how implementation may phase over a number of years, it seems like student assignments and certainty should occur, obviously before the start of the school year, but we're not implementing every single middle school change or grade configuration change in a single year. So it's hard for me to grasp us notifying every. Shouldn't it be the changes that are going to be happening within that year that we plan on implementing? And we haven't even the staff haven't even phased through that work and what it looks like at this point. So it seems like a pretty far leap to say that, you know, by the end of this school year, we're going to say with certainty where a student maybe, if this is a 3 or 4 year implementation plan, where a student 4 years from now is going to be, is my point.
So Joe is a subcommittee member, and then Scott, and just as a process observation, I noticed we're spending a lot of time on this.
So I'm ready to move on, but that, I think, put a point on what we were talking about. If you look at the first bullet, it's about these transition plans. One thing, we did not figure out the phasing and the details of the East Side feeder patterns. We were talking about distribution of middle schools. And even as we talked in last meeting, there's a whole another round of work to figure out that, but we know this general structure of middle schools. And that first bullet about these implementation plans is all about some version of what Tony just said, you know, being prepared, having a plan, working it out with the school and the teachers, setting a timeline that's fiscally responsible to get there. So if that means phasing, which we really hadn't talked about till now, then there's some rolling date to, you know, close down each of those phases. I think that's what this, that would be the extension of what I thought we were talking about in this.
So I just want to clarify based on what I presented to you previously and what Judy just said. The staff expects that by the end of this school year, all of the feeder patterns will be established to the middle schools and boundaries with their boundaries, okay? So that is what we expect to have done by the end of this school year. So we could inform families based on where they live, this is going to be your new boundary and your new feeder pattern, okay? We would do that shortly after that process is completed. We would likely do it at the beginning of the next school year because we know that communication doesn't get to families over the summer, but that they check in when they were back in school. So I'm just telling you what our expectation would be for feeder patterns and boundaries. If that's what this is referring to, hopefully that clarification helps.
So I thought Scott's got a potential solution and Joe's got a.
Okay, if we keep proceeding starting in March like we have been, I think there's no way we'll have a board decision in June. I think we should talk about what we have some control over, which is D-BRAC, and say that by the end of May, we will strive to, this is the language I have, by the end of May, we will strive to have a plan, completed plan, with feeder patterns and boundaries. And if it happens earlier than then, great, but I think even end of May is going to be, unless, well.
So can I just ask a question to Scott? Scott, when you were talking, the we in that, is that the we was D-BRAC or the we was the district? Because I think that that's an important distinction, right? Where if the we is D-BRAC, I completely agree with you. But if the we is through the superintendent, through the board, then I don't think it's realistic.
So Scott's saying we is D-BRAC.
D-BRAC, okay, then that's an important point of clarity. I totally concur.
So if I could offer, what Scott, just looking at, I'm trying to make it simple and actually just capture what you say, but D-BRAC's work is what we're referring to in the second bullet, to be completed by May, correct? So when we're voting on this, that's what we're voting on. Scott's got a specific phrasing of it we can use.
Okay, so for D-BRAC members, get your pen out. We're on bullet 2, and Scott will read, hopefully, a short amendment.
D-BRAC will strive to have a completed feeder pattern and boundaries for the east side by May 2016.
I'm trying to capture that. We'll strive to have a
Completed feeder pattern, probably patterns, fix my grammar, and boundaries for the east side by May 2016.
Thanks.
Okay, so with that amendment to the second bullet, D-BRAC will strive to have a completed feeder pattern and boundaries by May 2016. So let's, for the east side, sorry. For the east side. So you've got 2 blanks at the bottom. I can live with this. I'm opposed to this. Please write your name on one of those 2 blanks. So anyone else still printing your name? A little angst over here. So let's shift to our next agenda item. So what's going to happen while D-BRAC goes through and is approving meeting minutes, we're going to huddle and total up what all you have just been producing. And when we come back, we'll announce those results, and then we'll shift gears into the west side. So I'm going to Jason for the meeting minutes.
Okay, folks, so as the votes are being tallied, we've got, I think, 5 sets of meeting notes that we've got to authorize tonight, which are the ones from the January 14th, January 9th, December 17th, December 10th, and December 5th. Links were sent out of these. You all, I think, have hard copies. So I'm going to give the floor for a couple minutes for folks to read through these, and then we'll hopefully adopt as many of them as we can tonight. Pam, you could do this. I could get your name placard down there. What is going? Shannon, you were having too much fun over there. Ooh. All right, members, once you're done reading your notes, if you could put your name card arms up so that I know you're done and we can proceed. All right, if members will take their seats, we're going to go ahead and resume our meeting. Okay, members, so starting off with our meeting notes for December 5th, 2015, are there any amendments to those notes in December? Seeing no offers of amendments, all those in favor of adopting the notes from December 5th, please say aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? All right, meeting notes from December 5th adopted. Meeting notes from December 10th, are there any amendments? Hearing none, all those in favor of adopting the notes from December 10th, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Notes from the 10th adopted. Notes from December 17th, are there any proposed amendments to those? Yes, Hector? Okay, noting that Hector was at the meeting on the 17th. Very well. Any other amendments? All right, all those in favor of adopting the notes from the 17th as amended, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? With one abstention, the notes, with two abstentions, thank you very much. The notes from the 17th are adopted as amended, thank you very much. All right, next are the meeting notes from January 9th. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the notes from the 9th, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Notes from the 9th are adopted. And lastly, notes from January 14th. Are there any amendments? Pam? Okay, Pam Knowles was here. Any other amendments? All right, all those in favor of adopting the notes from January 14th as adopted, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? With two abstentions, the notes from January 14th are adopted as amended. Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to now turn it back over to Jim Jacks, who is going to announce the voting results from our first two sets of ballots. Jim.
Thank you, Chairman Trombley. So just to remind you, for D-BRAC to forward advice on behalf of the committee to the superintendent, you need 60%. Which is 15 or more votes, and all 6 pieces got 15 or more. So more specifically, the K-8 the K-8 criteria first piece, recommendations and exceptions, that was your first page, 16 yes, 1 no, 1 abstain. On the second piece from K-8, urgency and interim, 15 yes, 2 no, 1 abstain. The third K-8 piece of advice around implementation, 16 yes, 1 no, 1 abstain. And then for the middle school criteria, recommendation number 1, 16 yes, 1 no, 1 abstain. Recommendation 2, 17 yes, 1 abstain. Recommendation number 3, 16 yes, 1 no, 1 abstain. So congratulations on that. Now let's shift gears to our next agenda item, which is shifting to West Side boundaries. As before, we're going to hear from the subcommittee. Michael will provide a little framing, and then Judy will walk the committee through the handout. And again, we're looking for questions of clarification at this point.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you to the members of the West Side Subcommittee, including Scott Bailey, Sheila Martin, Jason Trombley, Hector Roche, Tony Magliano, Michelle Arndt, and Julie Esparza Brown. We were tasked with addressing 4 specific issues: overcrowding at Chapman, overcrowding at the combined Hayhurst Odyssey program, overcrowding at Lincoln, and overcrowding at Capitol Hill. We were also given some constraints. We were asked to make changes as soon as possible to address current issues rather than waiting several years. We were given a constraint that we had to use the existing buildings. Again, we did not have the time to wait or the budget to build new buildings. We had a constraint asked to leave neighborhood schools and communities intact as much as possible, and that included promoting walkability and proximity versus busing kids to more distant schools and avoiding split feeder patterns. We also had a constraint of avoiding cross-river boundary shifts for 3 reasons. One is that the East Side plan, as we've just recently heard, is still under development, and exactly when and where K-5's middle schools will be placed hasn't been determined, and so it wasn't clear which buildings might be available on the East Side at some point. There are 2 focus options on the East Side that are also looking for homes at this point, and there was concern about transportation issues, particularly getting kids back and forth over the bridges at rush hour times. We had a constraint of proposing long-term solutions as to the extent we can rather than short-term Band-Aids, as much as possible keeping programs intact, 1 building per program. And we had a strong request from the community to allow grandfathering of students to current schools as much as possible. Based on those constraints and reviewing this proposal 2B, which you'll see one slightly different, there is one key change we asked, the subcommittee feels that by and large, this proposal addresses the identified issues and meets the constraints. And the reason we say that, it addresses all the key issues that were identified. Significant changes can happen this fall. Most of the changes are made by shifting a whole program or changing a feeder pattern for a whole school, and therefore we're having, we hope, minimal impact on walkability and proximity and not having split feeder patterns. And we think this can be a relatively long-lasting solution on the order of 5 to 10 years. The subcommittee does acknowledge that this is not a perfect solution and suggests further optimization if this general proposal is included in the superintendent's proposal and then approved by the board. And specifically, we had 3 areas where we wanted improvements. One was optimizing exactly where boundary lines are drawn. There are a number of individual issues with respect to specific neighborhoods that we were looking at the high level, and clearly when you get down to boots on the ground, you will find areas where a line needs to be shifted one way or another. We did recognize that there are issues with enrollment at both Hayhurst and Bridal Mile, and would recommend that, again, some changes be made, not necessarily to the whole 50,000 foot level, but certainly down at the 20 or 10,000 foot level, changes be made to make sure that there are right-sized schools in all of our schools. And finally then, we haven't talked about, but obviously we want to make sure that the implementation is done in a well-thought-out way so that it works as smoothly as possible for all kids.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm going to give you a quick technical walkthrough And I'm going to start with a refresher. I will go, let me just poll the committee. How many of you had a chance to review this PowerPoint, which was in a packet yesterday in advance of the meeting? If a few of you didn't, I will move as quickly as I can through the background pieces and then just make sure that you understand all the components that are in this revised scenario. Okay? Okay. Michael mentioned a number of these priority enrollment issues that were up for resolution, and the effort has been to try and address all of them, especially after we brought in 2015 enrollment numbers and recognized that potential under-enrollment at Hayhurst and overcrowding at Capitol Hill were more significant than we had thought back in October. So very quickly, we brought you two scenarios in the fall. We addressed Chapman overcrowding by boundary changes to Ainsworth and Bridle Mile, but the response from that, after all your month of listening and deliberating together, was that it was not enough change to offset future growth. In looking at the Hayhurst crowding, we saw that Odyssey to East Sylvan, which was in scenario 1 and 2, was generally positively received, however, and that at that time, the unenrollment at Hayhurst was unaddressed. The Lincoln crowding, there was a proposed boundary change to Wilson that raised concern that it divided an elementary school into 2 middle schools and on to high school after that. So that was the split feeder concern that you asked us to revisit. Skyline crowding wasn't an issue under discussion at the time, but under-enrollment was. There was a proposal, in scenario 1, to convert to a K-5. The response to that, as you discussed earlier in your K-8 recommendation, was to make an exception for Skyline and allow them to remain a K-8. Capitol Hill crowding was not in the scenarios that you saw in the fall. Back in 2016, at the start of 2016, we worked together on a revised scenario that did slightly different things to address those same issues. So you saw greater boundary changes to Ainsworth, but the way that those were designed was to move through a number of different schools, so sort of a domino or ripple effect. And that raised a concern about that ripple effect, specifically on schools like Ainsworth and Reiki, that both had to take in new kids and have other current kids move away. So that raised a concern that you asked us to address. We still had Odyssey at East Sylvan at that time. We also saw Hayhurst under-enrollment addressed by some boundary changes coming in from other areas that raised concerns about walkability and levels of diversity at nearby schools if those changes were made. The change to Lincoln was through those K-5 level boundary changes, which became middle school changes, then high school changes, and you were concerned that it was not enough to provide adequate relief for Lincoln. Skyline was not in this scenario because of your decisions around K-8 exception, and the Capitol Hill crowding was addressed through a boundary change to Stevenson. This is an area where one bit of feedback, prominent feedback that we heard from the community, as Michael alluded, was the importance of allowing that to be grandfathered and so phased in over time. All right, so you gave us inputs on what you wanted to see next, and we've done some work to achieve those. And I want to take a moment to note that in addition to what you asked us as a committee to do, provide greater relief for Lincoln, relieve Chapman, but do less shifting between schools, and consider other program moves to accomplish those goals. That was kind of the primary driver for this last revision, the one you're going to see next. We have also heard an amazing amount of input from community members, really thoughtful and creative strategies. By having such a transparent process, we've sort of allowed crowdsourcing of solution sets to come back, and it's been a remarkable experience, and I believe a very positive one, to have so much input come in from the community. We're extremely grateful by that, but what we noticed along the way is that we were receiving some solutions that were somewhat outside of our working parameters, some of those constraints that Michael revealed for you. So I'd like to take a moment just to describe some of those. And part of this is for our viewing audience, but just also to ground in where we finally landed in the face of all of the ideas that were available to us. So the first is the notion of split campuses. We had some suggestions that Chapman could be stay one school and operate on different campuses. Portland Public Schools has some experience with this. It's all on the east side now. 2 schools, here's some of the specifics about them, different grades on different campuses, and distances between those campuses. Based on the experience we have, we acknowledge that they are very costly solutions, and they create very complicated daily routines for staff, families, and students. And in fact, we're working with some urgency to combine those back into single campuses. And unless there are absolutely no other feasible solutions, we would suggest that all schools, if you call it a school, would be located on single campuses. We also heard some suggestions around immersion expansion. And so just a moment on where we are as a district on that, working with our dual language department, who have made recommendations to our school board on this issue over the past several years. The expansion is focused on areas where we have concentrations of emerging bilingual students who currently do not have access to a program in their native language, particularly because the programs in their region are full. So that's where our priority is for citing new immersion programs first. There isn't a high number of bilingual teachers out there that we can access to start new programs. So we are looking to make best use of the teachers that we have. One of our consolidation questions that's before you is around helping with that, as well as making sure we place any new teachers in front of as many of our emerging bilingual students as possible. So it's mostly outer Southeast and in some ways in North Portland where the priority zones for dual language expansion, especially in the Spanish language. Southwest certainly could see expansion in the future, but it would likely come after those other priorities are addressed. So it is a good idea. It's not necessarily a timely idea that we can invest in at this time. Okay. There's also been asked whether we could simply open additional neighborhood schools to absorb particularly the growth that we're seeing in Northwest Portland and around Chapman. So we've talked a lot about what it would take to make a strong school, and any new school that comes into the system, similarly to how you've been talking about middle schools, we would want to make sure if it was a K-5, for example, it would have space to manage at least 2 sections of students, and preferably 3 sections. So we wouldn't want to open small buildings as neighborhood schools, knowing that they may not be able to hit those very benchmarks that we've worked hard to establish. And in addition, we would want to make sure that there are enough students in the region to meet our preferred enrollment targets at both the new school and nearby schools. And this is really echoing what I read in your K-8 recommendation about placing school, or the middle school recommendation about placing schools and thinking about enough students across the region to fill them. So I want to point out that relief for Chapman, getting it down to about 95% of its capacity over the 5-year period, is anywhere between 6 and maybe even 9 classrooms of students. And that's certainly not enough on its own to generate a new school or to fully utilize any building that we'd have. So then we'd have to pull from other schools that aren't necessarily overcrowded at this time to provide that relief. So that's why you're not seeing any new neighborhood schools in this proposal, particularly at East Sylvan, where it was proposed that that could possibly be an elementary school. It's a very small campus with only 13 classrooms at this time and not large enough to meet that. This is just a reminder of sort of the 3 rules about focus options because they fit into this dialogue as well. Through this process, no focus option schools or programs will be closed. In fact, no schools will be closed through this enrollment balancing process of any kind. Focus option expansion, closure, or reconfiguration will be on the table for the educational options review process, which is launching right now. Principals are out there doing their work to complete information about their programs and the like. Focus options, however, may be relocated in this process, intact as they exist now, not differently configured, but as they exist, where needed in order to alleviate under-enrollment and overcrowding at neighborhood schools. And certainly that's the kind of change that we've been contemplating, you've been looking at, and you're going to see some more of tonight. Okay. So then finally, this prioritization of implementing in 2016, if possible, for West Side changes. If we can find solutions for 2016, that's preferred to waiting till 2017, knowing that there are many other changes that have to be implemented through time and that there is urgency in overcrowding, at least at Chapman and Lincoln and Hayhurst. I want to point out that scenario 2B that you're about to see addresses overcrowding. It doesn't cross the river. We are not opposed to looking at cross-river boundaries at all. In fact, indeed, we did in an earlier model of a middle school change that you saw. What we've done to signal the importance of this, and you will see it on your map, which is in your packet, is have Chapman, West Sylvan, Lincoln boundaries subject to future residential development. Those will be considered for future boundary changes at the time of rezoning. So those large swaths of land that may be becoming residential in the future, including the post office, at the time they become rezoned, we will reserve the right to look at that time at what the best boundary would be, and it may be a boundary that crosses the river. Okay, so lots of background. Let's get to the point. In your packet, you have a map, you have a KPI sheet. You also have a letter that came in from the principals of Jackson Middle School and Hayhurst Odyssey to give you more information about implementation if it were to happen at that school. I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough and then open for clarifications. Okay, this is what's the same as what you saw in last scenario 2A. Skyline is still a K-8. Capitol Hill is still getting relief to Stevenson. No change in how that's proposed. The Maplewood boundary still changes from Gray Middle School to Jackson Middle School. The other part that's the same is that small area of Maplewood would shift into Hayhurst. So that's the same. Things that are different. You won't see boundary changes between Ainsworth and Reekie and Hayhurst, Bridle Mile and Hayhurst, Reekie and Hayhurst in this plan. What you do see is a Spanish immersion move from Ainsworth to East Sylvan, and that program remains assigned to West Sylvan and Lincoln for middle and high school. You see in the way that it was written in our Odyssey moving from Hayhurst to Jackson, and I'm just going to point out right here that on Tuesday the subcommittee met, reviewed this, and have brought to you a recommendation that in fact this should move from Hayhurst to the Smith building, which would begin in 2017. And Michael can share with you more about the committee deliberation around that, subcommittee deliberation. What you also see in this is different portions of Chapman boundary moving to Ainsworth Neighborhood School than what you saw before. You also see Bridle Mile boundary moving to Ainsworth, something that you haven't seen before. And by doing this, Bridle Mile becomes a small enough K-5 area that it can then go into Gray Middle School without Gray Middle School being overcrowded and then feed onto Wilson High School. So it's an intact feeder pattern from K through 12, kids with what's the remaining portion of Bridle Mile boundary becoming part of the Gray-Wilson feeder pattern. Okay, these we do not have to spend much time on, but I believe in your packet you also have a large, like an 11 by 17, that if you look, Margaret's got hers right there. Margaret is modeling. On the back side of that is a row for every boundary area and every program you have considered for change on the west side since we started this process. Those that are highlighted in blue are the specific areas that are included in this change. The chart includes some areas that you thought about, talked about, but didn't actually put on a scenario. So We have 3 small areas that are going from Chapman to Ainsworth, including the South Waterfront PSU area. And really quickly, we're just flashing up here these direct certified and historically underserved percentages for each of these small areas. You can see the total effect on your KPIs. So this is just the fine grain, and you also have this area close to where the East Sylvan is located. That's the East Sylvan building. Chapman now would become part of Ainsworth, small number of students. And then you have an area that's just west of Chapman, which is over here, and this is that Willamette Heights area that you heard a little testimony about earlier, and in which the committee shared some concerns about subcommittee at their meeting, and in the recommendation in front of you, it's pointed out that the district maybe should look at some adjustment in there, as in leaving some of those areas assigned to Chapman. None of this has any implications for middle or high school. It's only at the K-5 level. The bridle mile to Ainsworth is an area that's near West Sylvan Middle School, so West Slope up into, this is, I believe Shoals Ferry Road winds up this way. There's Patton Road. So that portion of the bridle mile, what's now bridle mile, would become part of the Ainsworth K-5 boundary, would remain assigned to West Sylvan Middle School and Lincoln High School. It's 148 K-5 students. In addition to that change, as I mentioned, bridle mile with a smaller boundary now fits into the Gray Middle School building, so it's proposed to change to Gray Middle School and Lincoln High School. That's a total of 434 students across grades 6 through 12. Did I say that? That was bad. Wilson High School. It's good to know people are listening. The other thing that you saw before was all of Maplewood. Because of bridle mile coming in, Maplewood goes out. So it is one of those ripple effects. And you've seen this before in previous studies. You've also seen the small area of Maplewood coming into Hayhurst. That's the only area proposed to change now. You've heard the subcommittee's recommendation that the district take a further look at that. And then, as I mentioned, the Capitol Hill to Stevenson. What you get from all of that, in order to provide adequate relief for Chapman in this scenario, Spanish immersion going to Ainsworth, 313 students move. That's the current number. It includes 143 students who live in the Ainsworth boundary because the program is set up for 50% of the seats to go to neighborhood students. It does require a different change for Odyssey than what you've seen before, and we're going to acknowledge it's difficult to predict attrition due to the program move and the fact that some people may decide not to follow the program. It also allows additional boundary changes so that Ainsworth enrollment grows to about 500 as a neighborhood school, and there is room, if some Ainsworth neighborhood students decide to stay at the neighborhood school, there would be room for that. And then at Chapman, enrollment going down to about 579, so that's far less than what they would be without this change. And you can see that the direct certified, so the rate of poverty between the schools is a little closer than it is now. That includes, so as we said, we've designated undeveloped land for future boundary change. Areas serving vulnerable families remain in Chapman, and there's room at Ainsworth to expand if desired. In order to address Lincoln overcrowding, Bridle Mile becomes a smaller K-5 school, but the students close to West Sylvan are able to maintain that assignment. And it also keeps the areas along Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway that we heard concerns about before part of the Bridle Mile area. Gray, the middle school change, you see the Gray enrollment in 2020 at about 98% of utilization, and pretty substantial relief for West Sylvan. This area is mostly the same as what you saw in scenario 1 and 2, but it doesn't require a feeder pattern split like what you saw before. Here are our estimates. If the change were in place today, what enrollment would be between Lincoln and Wilson. And finally, regarding Hayhurst overcrowding, moving a 222 student K-8 program. It includes 62 Hayhurst neighborhood students. The school's done a great job, the program's done a great job of polling families to give us a sense of who would stay and go, but we would still have work to do just to firm up that number. If it were Jackson would be above 1,000 students. So that's why the additional option of Smith is the one that the subcommittee would prefer. And you've got that potential temporary lower enrollment, which is expected to grow but could be smaller at first. Finally, on implementation, as I've mentioned, it is difficult to know the immediate impact of program moves. So if these changes were to be recommended, we would start polling families and have some details on how that implementation could take effect. And we would then also model the boundary change impact by grade once we're sure that this is a preferred scenario of the group. So that's my walkthrough, and we're open for clarifying questions.
Clarifying questions from D-BRAC, Pamela, and then Nisha.
So should the Spanish immersion program move to East Sylvan, what would be the neighborhood school that the English side, I mean, what would be the defined neighborhood for that school, since it used to be the Ainsworth boundary, but would it remain only the Ainsworth boundary if it's in a separate school? Does that make sense?
So that's to be determined whether there's any change in the preference or set-asides. I'd like to say, since you asked, that for this coming lottery cycle, since decisions about this change will not be made in advance of the lottery cycle, we will use the current boundaries, and Debbie Armendariz from Dual Languages here. We've already met on this, and we would use the current boundaries to establish neighborhoods status for the lottery for incoming students this year, and then any changes would be determined for 2017.
So my questions relate to Hayhurst Bridal Mile and the move of the Spanish immersion program. I have some concerns about the drops in enrollment for both Hayhurst and Bridal Mile, but particularly for Hayhurst, since it's the kind of the second highest poverty school on the west side, and it doesn't seem to have the same growth trajectory as Bridal Mile. And I'm wondering if we're seeing a trend toward growth, and if there's kind of a period of time where we can predict them to be sort of back to, kind of a more preferred enrollment scenario. And then with respect to Spanish immersion, I know we've had experiences on the east side where Spanish immersion programs have been moved. So for example, with respect to Wrigler, which was a K-8 school with Spanish immersion, and then it was converted to K-5, and that program moved to, the middle school portion of that program moved to Beaumont. So we have kind of two things we could look at, both the conversion of a K-8 school that was predominantly Latino to a K-5 school, and the move of an immersion program. And then the feeder pattern for what used to be Atkinson, Hosford to Cleveland was moved about 7 or 8 years ago to Atkinson, Mount Tabor, and Franklin. So we have kind of some precedent there. And do we have information about what families experienced, how that went? Just any information we have about the effects of those two Spanish immersion program moves that have already taken place in the district. So those are kind of my clarifying questions.
Regarding the Spanish immersion program and them being co-located at Ainsworth now affords them the music, art, and PE. And how could they retain those kinds of services? And then what would transportation look like? Would we widen, the area that we would transport kids to, because probably that program would be under-enrolled for, particularly at the beginning. And back to Hayhurst also, I echo the concerns of some of the parents about retaining the wraparound services there, particularly because of the community that they draw from.
Other clarifying questions, Alice, and then Scott.
So my question about the move from Spanish immersion at Ainsworth to East Sylvan, if the move was made, would the Spanish immersion teachers automatically move with that program?
Scott.
So in terms of Hayhurst and Bridal Mile, the bottleneck is Robert Gray, that we could move boundaries to increase population at both of those schools, but that would overwhelm Robert Gray as it currently is. So aside from adding portables to Robert Gray to increase capacity, is there another solution out there?
Other clarifying questions?
So can I just point of clarification or process question? So are you looking for the responses that we have available now, or I know that we're really time limited in our evening with adjournment about 25 minutes away. So
Right. So if we have short answers, let's provide them. And again, we're just to step back from the conversation right here. We're ultimately trying to determine tonight where you are as a group. And so, and remember, disagreement is okay. It does not have to be unanimous. So let's answer the ones that we can briefly. We're trying to avoid a long, involved conversation about a lot of these. And fundamentally, at the end of this, it's your decision whether you're going to print your name by "I can live with this" or print your name by "I'm opposed to this." So, Judy, do you have a couple of quick answers? Sarah.
I'm going to do just quick. If you reference your KPI document, page 2, you look at Hayhurst, so I'm going to address the Hayhurst question. So what we see is projected growth for Hayhurst in the future. So you can see that on the KPIs. Eventually, like by 2020 with scenario 2B, you would see it at about 54 students per grade. So it meets the kind of 2 sections per grade that we discussed.
And we've got a short answer on the Spanish immersion teachers going with the program.
That's not the one that I wanted to address. I'm Debbie Armendariz, by the way, Senior Director of the Department of Dual Language. So to the question about what have we learned about the programs that we moved, the Rigler that was moved to Beaumont and the Hosford that was moved to Tabor, I just wanted to say what I do know for sure is that both of those programs are really full. The Beaumont program and the Mount Tabor program, those are really robust, sought after, and we don't always have space for people who want to go into those programs. But the other point to remember is that all of our programs experience some attrition, and one of the opportunities that we find within attrition is that it allows us to provide additional access for native speakers who can enter at those grades. So we've done a much better job in recent years of being able to backfill attrition.
And if I could just say, I mean, this won't surprise you, but we don't have firm answers on what the actual programming would look like for any of these changes. There's some phasing out and there's some phasing in. We provide through the arts tax, art for every K-5 student. So will you still have art? Yeah, art will still be in the building. We have a core program, and the core, we would be delivering the core program. Will it look and feel somewhat differently? Absolutely. Our administrators, staff, and others would be working to ensure that as many of those things are in place as possible, and particularly in cases where schools are going through that transition where they maybe might have a smaller number of students in the short term but are expected to come back up. There might be some latitude in the short-term staffing decisions. Might be certainly not my decision to make, but just as a broader frame, those are the kinds of final decisions that will come through that staffing process. I think for you all to acknowledge the importance of maintaining as many of those things as possible is certainly helpful as you move any kind of recommendation forward.
Jason.
So I thank you for staff for answering those questions. I think there are two other points I just wanted to raise, and I think they're in the context of that last question, but then also the question from Director Esparza-Brown, particularly around, our low-income students. If their school is subject to under-enrollment, what's going to be the impact to their services, especially for students who are identified as low-income. So I wanted to bring us back quickly to what we put in our original framework. So there are a couple of pieces. One is that we said is that for any school that was going to potentially have a dip in their SES status, that would potentially have an impact on if those services are going to still be around. We put in language that said if that is going to be impacted, that the district had to find a way to maintain those current service level offerings. And just to remind us, that's a piece in the framework that was both endorsed by the superintendent and the school board. So those are things that are in place right now. So that's one of the things that we have to look for when the superintendent gives her official recommendation later on. How will those service offerings be maintained? I think the second piece is one of the things that we're trying to look at in terms of program offerings. It also comes back down to what we did put in the framework, which was do ultimately what you can actually afford and do well. So while we're aiming for a number of aspirational things, it always comes back to that practical test that we put back in, which was we can aim high, but it comes back to the district saying, of everything we would like to do in phase 1 and 2, it comes back to what can we prioritize financially and effectively implement. So those are backstops that are in that framework that we intentionally put in there. Given the history that we've gone through with different school changes, we put those in there intentionally. So I just wanted to remind members that we did put that in there for a reason. And those are things we can fall back on as the district continues to evolve, move forward in this work, and things that we can work with the community to check going forward.
Thank you for that reminder, because this committee does a lot, has a lot of information, and sometimes key things fade after 6 months, so it's good to be reminded. So I will remind you now, you have 3 sheets of paper in front of you, and we'd like you to take a couple of minutes and print your name under I can live with this, or print your name under I am opposed to this. Do the first sheet, West Side Advice first, scenario 2B. And let's take a couple of minutes and turn those in. Let's just do one at a time for a second, because that'll be easier. easier to tally. Number one.
I just want to make sure that I understood. I thought I heard Judy say that, that they weren't gonna, that this wasn't valid, but is that correct?
Let's ask Judy. Hey Judy, Alice has a quick question for you. Can you check in with her, please? I'm trying to. Just to see whether. So this is still just sheet one? Yes. Go ahead and do sheet two. I'm pretty sure sheet one. Okay, well,
We did do that. That's all.
can you,
So as members are going ahead and casting their votes, there was one piece of information that's going to be applicable to all three votes. I do acknowledge that I think there are about 5 or 6 members who are not here tonight. So what we're going to do is all the members who are not in attendance tonight, they're going to go through the same voting process with all of these ballots, and those are going to get submitted to either myself or staff, and then the final report that we will publish shortly thereafter will include the full tally in terms of who has voted and on what side, and as well as anyone that has chosen to vote in the minority. Those minority statements will also be included in the final report. So just purposes of clarification of what will happen with these votes next, as well as from the members who aren't here, I just wanted to clarify that so everybody knew.
So several of you have indicated to me that you're ready for number 2 and number 3. A couple of you are still working on number 1. So my suggestion. So. So for page. Michael, do you want to read it? Do you want to read it as a subcommittee member? On number 2. So Michael is going to read the text of West Side Advice number 2.
So following the same process that we did on the other ones, I will read it and ask for clarifying questions for the subcommittee. So this is advice number 2, and the preamble was the subcommittee recommended going with this proposal with some exceptions. And so what we're really talking about is exceptions. So committee generally endorses boundary changes described in scenario 2B, but sees potential for small improvements in the following areas. Neighborhoods directly west of Chapman Elementary, as has been pointed out by several people in the audience, has proposed to move to Ainsworth and could be reconsidered since it would appear from looking at the map that those students are within walking distance of Chapman, and we certainly wouldn't want to bus kids that could potentially walk to a neighborhood school. As we've had quite a bit of discussion around, Hayhurst underutilized as a result of changes, and potentially Maplewood exceeding their utilization. So clearly there's an opportunity to look at additional boundary changes to better balance enrollment between those two schools. Similarly, Bridle Mile underutilized as a result of changes in scenario 2B. Revisions considered to better use the classrooms in that school, and we do have the constraint, though, at Gray. Stevenson experiencing growth could be considered for additional boundary changes, and then the catch-all minor shifts to optimize exact placement of boundary lines should be considered based on community input and evaluation for any unintended negative impacts on students. Any clarifying questions?
Seeing none, take a couple of minutes and sign your name under I can live with this, or sign your name under I am opposed to this. D-BRAC. We'll shift to number 3. As before, Michael will read it. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Jim. The first part is the subcommittee's guidance with respect to implementation. Wherever possible, the committee suggests following the current PPS policy of allowing students to attend their current school to the highest grade. If there is a pressing need for more rapid shifts of students, potentially such as a serious overcrowding and continuing growth at Chapman or Lincoln, exceptions to the policies should be considered. In the case that exceptions are determined to be required, extra effort and care should be taken to make the transition as smooth as possible and minimize any negative impacts to students and families that are required to change schools. Clarifying questions? Thank you.
Okay, take a couple of minutes and sign your name to one of those blanks. I can live with this, or I'm opposed to this. And when you turn them in, we'll start to talk a little bit about next steps while we tally these up, and then we'll come back to you with the results.
I'm doing it 5 and I'm cutting it off. Members, really quick, they're still tallying the votes, so on request of staff, can I get a motion by the membership to extend the meeting by 5 minutes so that they can finish the tallying on schedule?
So moved.
Second? Check. All right, thank you. Meeting extended for 5 minutes. Well, he voted. Okay, all those in favor of extending the meeting by 5 minutes, raise your green cards or your hands. Okay. Any opposed? No? Okay, meeting is extended for 5. So as staff is tallying the votes right now, I just wanted to explain what the next steps will be. I have about 5 members to contact to get their final votes in, both electronically and written. And what will happen is I will work with the writing subcommittee to kind of do all of the stylistic and grammar edits to the document, which after that is done, all of what will happen then is every vote recorded will follow the appropriate section in the document. So you'll see the recommendation, the final vote tally, and any of members who chose to vote in the minority and author minority statements, that'll be included at the end of each section. Once that is drafted, I will officially submit that to the superintendent, at which point we will work to schedule a meeting where the committee can officially brief the superintendent on where we have landed on our recommendations for both K-8's middle school criteria as well as proposed changes to the west side boundaries, et cetera.
Okay, D-BRAC, so announcing some results here for the 3 pieces of advice on the west side boundaries. The first piece, scenario 2, 18 yes, 1 no. Boundary change guidance, 17 yes, 2 no. And implementation guidance, 18 yes, 1 no. Congratulations. So Jason talked about next steps, I think. Is there anything else you need to cover at this point, recognizing we're 2 minutes over?
I did that.
Last comments from John.
So now that Jason's given you guidance on drafting the final document, so as soon as that is completed, we will set up a meeting where you present it formally to the superintendent. We try to schedule that when we've done this with past advisory committees at a time when as many of you can make it as possible. So we'll do it through a poll. So we'll give you multiple options and then ask you to vote, and then we pick the one that the most can come to, and we will do that as soon as possible. So you'll expect to get that poll from us tomorrow, okay? And they'll all be dates that we know work on the superintendent's calendar, okay?
Jason, any last comments?
No, I don't have any comments. Membership, thank you very much. We are adjourned.